Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to today's webcast. My name is Zina M. Pagan, ARF's Marketing Manager, and I will be your moderator for today. Before we begin learning more about the long-term effects of television advertising, we'll go over some house rules. We are aiming to provide the best webcast experience available. You can help us execute this by keeping yourself muted and your computer web camera turned off. Unfortunately, if you do turn on your cameras or unmute yourselves, I will have to disconnect your access to today's webcast. The audio will be streamed. This means that you will be able to hear us through your computer speakers. However, if you prefer to use a teleconference option, please use the information provided on your screen. Additionally, I will post the information on the chat box. Should you have any questions during the session, please send these to me using that same chat box. ARF does not own the copyrights to the presentation. However, the session will be recorded. If you would like to view the recorded event, the file will be available within 2 weeks from today. We are extending the conversation on social media. If you would like to join us, please use hashtag ARF Webcast with Twitter handle @the_ARF. If you're interested in hosting a webcast of your own, please contact me at zina@thearf.org. We are hosting several events through the fall. If you're able to, please join us. Next week's ARF webcast will delve into the economics and behaviors of the high-value mobile app user with the true value of a loyal mobile app user. Our event at the ARF on November 2nd will help you optimize your cross-platform media investment. Please join us if you're able to, if you're in the New York area. And for those of you joining us on the West Coast, we are happy to announce that the ARF will be back at the Facebook headquarters for an ARF West event next month. Keynoting is multiple award-winning agency Crispin Porter & Boguski's Chief Strategy Officer Eric Zunzik, covering topics on delivering what consumers want most, mastering mobile marketing. If you're interested in any of these events or other ARF programs, please check our website for further details. And without further delay, I present to you Nanette Burns, ARF's Journal of Advertising Research Managing Editor, who will open it up for our presenters today.
Well, thank you, Zina. Well, as you know, every January, members of the Journal of Advertising Research Editorial Board place their votes for Best Practitioner Paper and Best Academic Paper for the prior year. The winners are announced at the ARF annual conference in March. This year's Best Practitioner paper for 2015 was Measuring the Long-Term Effects of Television Advertising by Leslie Wood, Chief Research Officer at Nielsen Catalina Solutions, and David Poltrak, Chief Research Officer at CBS Corp and President of CBS Vision. A bit about their winning paper before they begin. Well, for the past quarter century, the so-called 2x multiplier has been used broadly to justify advertising spending. Marketers essentially have doubled the short-term effects of advertisement found in their marketing mix models to estimate the long-term benefits. But back in June 2014 at an ARF conference, Leslie and David suggested the long-term effects of television advertising, in fact, could be stronger than what the industry rule of thumb had demonstrated. Their study stirred the pot of the advertising research community, and in 2015, the authors updated it, testing single-source household data across 23 consumer packaged good brands and 31 television advertising campaigns. This time, the result was only slightly better than the 2x multiplier had shown, but what was even more important was the insight that came with it and the establishing of yet more questions for future research. Best papers, incidentally, are available for download at our publisher's site, journalofadvertisingresearch.com. Please feel free to reach out to me for download instructions. You can email me at nanette@thearf.org, and my name is spelled N-A-N like Nancy, E-T-T-E. Leslie is a recipient of an ARF Great Mind Award, and David, a 2-term ARF board chair, is a recipient of the Erwin Efron Award. I'm so pleased to hand over the mic to these distinguished individuals.
Good afternoon. So let's begin with the basic question. Why did we undertake this research? As Nanette mentioned, it's been a long time since there has been any substantive research on the long-term effects of advertising. In fact, it was in 1989 during the How Advertising Works paper, a seminal piece of research for the industry. But even there, it was really an afterthought and was done with limited scope, using the limited tools available at that time. And the conclusion reached with that limited study was that the long-term effect just about doubled the short-term effect, or the what was called basically the 2 times rule. That rather small research really carried the ball for the next several decades. And the 2-time rule was carried forward until almost the present day. During that time, there were dramatic changes in the media and advertising environment. I don't think anyone would argue with that. So we felt that it was time to update this information, and it was definitely necessary. For one thing, the whole digital part of our business had not even emerged at that point in time. So we felt that the tools now also were available to do a much better job. The new single source tools and the new databases such as Nielsen Catalina Solutions provides allowed us to really do this research correctly and in a very comprehensive way, which was not possible back in 1989. In addition, we had seen from 2005 to the present a switch away from traditional reach-based media planning to efficiency-based media planning. And with it, we had seen campaigns reaching lower and lower percentages of the overall target audience. It occurred to us that it is this broad reach of television that generates the multiplier effect through generating and building brand equity. And that if this trend towards efficiency-based as opposed to reach-based planning continued, brand equity was going to be eroded, and this 2-time effect may be diminished. All of that led us to this research. Also, we at CBS, we were developing at this time our campaign performance audit. And this research was designed to be provide a foundation for that 5-part program. The campaign performance audit is designed to work in all areas of the planning of an effective television campaign, starting with testing the message, maximizing the weekly reach, and getting more out of recency. This is where we address the idea of the pervasive nature of the medium. More precisely targeting potential consumers. We're no longer limited to age, sex, surrogate measures. We now have very comprehensive user data, and we can much more precisely target television campaigns. And finally, considering the context and seeing what the different context is. The long-term impact of television advertising cuts across all of these areas, and each one makes a contribution to the unique ability to build brand equity through television advertising. So I'm going to return at the end to talk a little bit about the upcoming work we have in this area, but now I'm going to turn it over to Leslie, who will take you through the findings of our research.
Thank you so much, David. It certainly has been quite a path we've we've made with all the research we're doing on how advertising works. So long-term effects are all about thinking about how does advertising work. So advertising is about building a connection between a brand and a consumer. As the ad is seen, the delivery is designed to push a consumer one step closer to the brand. So for some people, that might mean trial, and for others, it might mean being more deeply loyal. The key is to measure what after the exposure happens, what happens off into the future. So the short-term effects are the reaction to the actual seeing of the ad, and the long-term effects are you've seen the ad, you've either bought it or not. What happens out into the future? How much did those households continue to buy? On a theory level, we think taking the consumer from consideration to a purchase to deeper loyalty is what it really drives brand value and brand equity. And so being able to measure it measures how well did advertising create that brand equity. So we know everyone has had to make decisions about how to spend their money across time. And central to the reason for measuring the full value of advertising is, don't you want to know, based on real data, how your advertising is doing so that you can spend that money appropriately? So we measure short-term sales, and after we've measured short-term, we're looking at the long-term. So we need to understand what we have for short-term sales. And what we have for short-term sales is measuring the effect that a buyer that happens to the brand. So new buyers build penetration, existing buyers increase volume, either through larger baskets or more trips, and thus increasing their buy rate. But what happens after the short term? That's where long term comes into fact. Trial is critical, but what about your consumers? You know, we've been talking about putting this consumer in the center for well over 10 years. But far too many advertisers have decided to only focus on non-consumers, to look for trial. Think about the amount of work and the quality of creative you need to drive a non-buyer to be a trier. Much, much more difficult, much steeper path than actually the much easier job of increasing the connection a consumer already has to the brand. And we've seen this since this study in many, many ways that advertising to brand buyers is where you drive your highest returns. All consumers are not equal. This work has focused on finding a way to segment consumers that would discriminate and would differentiate those consumers based on how well they spend their money in the following year. So to do this, we need to understand trial and depth of repeat. This is one of the major contributions that phase 2 of this study made. The trial and depth of repeat is a way of looking at each purchase. So we start with each purchase occasion. And in this case, you can see that where trial and repeat starts, we have a year of purchasing before our data, our analysis begins. And we've watched these households across time. And the first time they buy the brand, they're classified as a T. They had trial. If they bought the brand the next time, in this, we're counting how many consecutive times the brand is actually bought. So the first is a trial, and the next one's a 2, because it's the second time in a row that the brand was bought. But then they didn't buy the brand when they bought this category. So these are category shopping trips, each bar. And then they did, so that was a 1, and then a 2. So each purchase occasion is classified by whether it was trial and how much repeat. And what you can see is across time, we went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we get to 6, and we truncated the long tail to be just 6. Now, this is what we did last year, or the year prior to this release. This work was actually done for audience measurement 9, which was 2014. And you can see this is the kind of work we were looking at. Once they buy, how does the counting begin? So now let's look at, for each of these bars, we have increasing levels of loyalty. So it's how much trial. Trial is the first. Those are the occasions that are classified with a T. How much, if you purchased it once, you were a 1 all the way up. And when we came back and looked at it, we actually used every single piece, not just up through 6. So what we're measuring here is the incremental value of moving from the first time you purchased to the second to the third, and this is the pattern you see. Of course, most brand buyers are either have bought it once or twice, because if you don't buy it consistently, you're going to end up in the 1-2. Now that changes by the kind of brand. A snack is bought every week. It's bought very consistently, but you might buy different flavors one week to the next, and so it might not be the same brand. So the number of actual households who were out on the far right might be, quite small compared to the number of households that had actually bought it once or twice. On average, what we see is a 1. So this is, when we looked at the multiplier, we said people who had bought it once, that's the first blue bar on the left. What was their multiplier? It was a 1.5. And you get to see across how that grows. And the ability of moving somebody to higher loyalty actually increases how many times they buy out into the future. So when we do a long-term effect study, we're looking at the short-term effect. We call that 1. Whatever the lift was, that's a 1. And then how much more did they get? So in the short term, we had 14 cents per exposed household. The long-term multiplier was, we got another 1, so it's a 2, twice as much. So the grand total multiplier is a 2. If you start with the short term and multiply it by 2, you will get the full effect of advertising. So we started with 14 cents per exposed household, multiplied by 2, and the full advertising effect was 28 cents per exposed household. Special K is a great example. So we were looking at the effect of advertising. And we really want to thank Jeff Dowd for all of his support. He allowed us to share this example, and he was very involved in the work as we did it through both phases. In this table, we can see that for every dollar gained in trial, the trial household spent 50 cents out across the next year. So if you got somebody to try the brand, they were likely to spend 50 cents in the following year. For every dollar by a switcher going from non-buying to buying, gained $2.80. So being a regular buyer got you $2.88 across the year, with the largest gains being in the very loyal household. On average, across the whole year, you got $1.80. Note that the yellow dot shows the number of households in each group, and you can see for cereal, much higher in the 1s and 2s. So there are many, many households in the trial and switcher groups, and less moving to the right. But don't forget, the value of the consumers on the right, they're the consumers that build the future for the brand. By looking at the number of purchases the short term drove for each of these groups, we get an average of 1.8. So why would you want to measure a multiplier? Why would you want to measure the actual measure of how well your ad did? If you want to assess your marketing tactics accurately, then using an average multiplier wouldn't be enough. Budgets should be set based on the actual value of your advertising. If you're a brand with a very low multiplier, that could change dramatically the value of advertising versus if your advertising is doing really well. You might find that certain kinds of creative drive better lift. You might find that as the brand gets healthier and healthier and stronger brand equity, that we see higher and higher returns. So understanding what drives higher multipliers can help advertisers drive higher multipliers for the future, because the higher the multiplier, the harder your advertising dollars are working. And since the essence of the multiplier is the value of the brand, it's a great way to help build healthy brands. So this work is being reported for phase 2 of this research. When we presented phase 1 in 2014 at Audience Measurement 9, it produced lots of discussion. After that conference, Dave suggested that we talk to industry experts, and boy did we. We talked to leaders across the industry, including Jeff Dowd at Kellogg's, Neil Cantor, who, bless him, he went through every calculation, every piece of the work, and made sure that he understood each piece and agreed with it. We talked to Ross Link, Bill Harvey, Byron Sharp, Jim Donius, and Mike Hansen. Some of these are competitors, some are academics, and some are industry, and they are all industry leaders. We measured 23 brands across 31 campaigns. So major body of work with a whole slew of experts. And what they suggested in terms of enhancement, I mean, we really wanted to produce something that the industry would agree was a good methodology. So the suggestions was that we do validation, which we did, and we'll share in a moment. Neil Cantor made the next suggestion. He discovered a piece that I'd missed. It's very complicated, but the details are shared in the JAR article that this created this webinar. That change had a dramatic effect on the multipliers, in many cases cutting them in half. We also found that we should be measuring periods when advertising was really on air. In the past, we had included all exposures, which often included the dribs and drabs of make goods. So instead, really focus on when advertising is on the air. The third piece was that the size of the multiplier, that the size had an let's see, the third piece, that long and short-term periods needed to align to industry standards, and only the indirect or residual offense should be accounted for. We were suggested that we not be black box, so there were fewer assumptions. We took out the 6+. We took out the 28 days. We made everything with fewer assumptions and gave it the ability to be measured across the entire picture. We agreed to measure other media beyond TV, and to be more explicit in how representative the sample is and statistics were used. One of the comments was that non-measured media were not included. Well, that's right. Non-measured media weren't included. As soon as media is measured, we would be happy to include it. But by definition, we can't include something that we don't actually have data for. I mean, that's one of the keys here, is that every one of these things was based purely on data. It's not a model. It's not an estimate. We're not trying to estimate pieces that we didn't have data for. So what are our results? Long-term effects study 1 versus 2, you can see that in many cases the results were, when they were extreme, like on the bottom, long-term effects 2 dampened those effects, and things did tend towards more towards a 2. So they were less extreme. And now we talk about validation. So the first step in validation was to use our data to replicate as closely as possible the original Len-Lodish methodology done in 1991. What we see is a very similar range of results. So we used 2 to 3 years over the first year. We did the same exact measurement that Len-Lodish did where possible, and we see a range from -1 up to +10, with most being at about 2 is what Len-Lodish's results. Our results for -1 to +10, Lodish's data showed a range from -2 to +9, with most at about 2. But note, this is based on a 2-year period and a 1-year short term. The industry doesn't measure short term any longer based on a full year of direct effects. When we compare the long-term LTE2 values to the ANCOVA-based Lotus method with today's time periods, there's a fairly decent correlation between the two sets. So we use Len-Lodish's methodology, which is sort of an ANCOVA-based estimate, versus our estimates, and they, in general, seemed like they were in alignment. So what are our findings? We have a range of results. These are the 31 studies. You can see at the low end, condiment, way over on the left, the long-term effect is close to 1. This is a brand that's has a very long purchase cycle. It's very, very slow. It's not bought regularly, and they're not spending a huge amount of money. On the far right, we have carbonated soft drinks and a flavored malt beverage, and we see things substantially over 2.5. On both ends, what we see is that the majority is in the 1.5 to 2.5 range, with a few above and a few below. Well, what could we learn about this? In general, year-over-year multipliers are similar. However, the range from one campaign year to the next can be as high as 32%. So some brands, the difference between 1 year's campaign and the next was very consistent, and for some of them, quite different. So that's interesting. Then we asked, does the value of the short-term effect create a bigger long-term effect? And you can see that certainly that's true. The higher your short-term, the higher the long-term. So we had this for 14 studies that included both the short-term and the long-term. When we looked at brands with, if you see condiment on the left and sodas, what was the weekly dollars? Does that drive loyalty? And does that give us a higher long-term effect multiplier? And yes, here again, we see that we do see that it's not a great it's not, the R squared isn't great, but we do see a highest correlation. The faster the purchase cycle, we also see a higher correlation. So this is sort of the opposite. You see the slope is going down. And that's because the long purchase cycles, the longer the purchase cycle, the less frequently the brand is bought, and the less you see that advertising really drives a high multiplier. So if your brand is bought weekly, regularly, and it has a high purchase cycle, your advertising is likely to have a higher multiplier. But what about some things that didn't actually seem to drive your long-term effects? One was GRPs. The size of the campaign didn't seem to matter at all. I mean, who's ever heard of an R squared of 0? I mean, that's, but that's because GRPs do dramatically change your short-term effect. But they don't, while they change your short-term effect, it does not have anything to do with the multiplier. We're not saying GRPs don't matter in terms of advertising. We're saying that GRPs do not change the size of the multiplier. What about share of voice? This again, no relationship between the share of voice and the long-term multiplier. We do know share of voice changes the quality of the advertising, but it does not change the short-term effects, but it doesn't change the long-term effects. So now I'm going to hand it back to Dave, and he can wrap up with our future plans.
Thank you, Leslie. So we've gotten a very positive response to this research, and I think everyone feels a lot more comfortable about the brand equity building long-term effect of their television campaigns now that we have confirmed that in a digital world. And the other message that came out also was that it does vary, and it can vary significantly, and that creative elements do matter. Which brings us back to our campaign performance audit, which is designed to be a comprehensive research program funded by CBS Vision to provide our advertisers with the best tools to make their campaigns as effective as possible. We have been working within the CPA framework now for 3 years, and we've done, and this study, this long-term effects study, was actually just the first study that we've done. Since then, we have looked at research, looking at step 2 and step 3, the whole concept of reach and the importance of reach, which certainly was borne out in this study. It brought us to and really sort of coming out of this study, to look at the purchase-driven concept, purchase occasion-driven concept of return on investment, which demonstrated that advertising seen within a short context, the recency concept, within a short period, 48 hours, of an actual purchase occasion has a more profound and more significant effect on the return on investment than advertising seen within a longer duration between it, when there's a longer duration between it and the purchase occasion. That has significant ramifications for how media is planned on a weekly basis. And we've worked with many advertisers through the CPA program to readjust their media strategy, the television strategy, to take into account the ideal of maximizing the exposure to advertising across the full target audience within the 48-hour window. We also have, with Nielsen-Catalina and also with Nielsen-Buyer Insights, built up a significant database of target GRPs to replace demographic GRPs. And we have 172 categories that we can now provide our advertisers with program performance against precise usage-based audiences like heavy Diet Cola drinkers or new luxury car buyers. And that is the way the industry is definitely moving in terms of finally breaking the bonds of age, sex, demographic orientation to more precise targeting. The other exciting and most recent study that we did just this year goes back to testing the message. We knew from all the research we've done how important and how much things varied by effective versus non-ineffective creative. And what we were able to do is, using the new neuro tools and the neuroscience techniques, we were able to look at the performance of advertisements, of individual ads, against the neuro testing parameters and the actual return on investment provided by that advertising. And we saw a very positive correlation between advertising that's very effective in terms of the results of the neuro tests, the pre-testing of that advertising, and the actual return on that advertising in the marketplace. That we're very excited about that research because we know that the impact, the value that advertisers can get from their television campaigns can, in a lot of cases, be significantly enhanced by applying this pre-testing and making sure that their advertising provides the best quality image for their brand. And now we're looking at the last step that we are looking at now is the whole area of context, a very important area as well. And I'm happy to report that our paper has been accepted for for presentation at the annual conference this spring, and it will be a paper on addressing the issue of context matters and how context matters. So that's it from here. We are very excited about this program of research and how it is evolving, and you can feel fairly confident that applying the CPA approach will deliver a successful television campaign. Thank you.
Thank you, David and Leslie. Right now, we're opening it up for questions. So the first question I have is, how often should a brand run a long-term effectiveness campaign?
Study? A long-term study?
Yes.
Well, I guess I would say they should do it quite often. They should, anytime you change your major message or your strategy, you'd want to know, is that strategy working? Is it building equity or not? It's not what we're seeing, though. We're seeing that people are very comfortable with using two. They're less interested in actually knowing what their multiplier is, which has been surprising to me. I would have thought that actually knowing how much the long term, I think it has to do, the reluctance is really to wait for the results, because you really need to look back at a campaign that ran over a year ago and see what happened. That's that level of patience at advertisers is, I think there isn't the long view.
Yeah, I think the message is not so much how many times you do a long-term effects study. The message is, how closely do you monitor the brand equity for your brand? The tendency has been to get totally focused on short-term ROI results and not really focus on how you were building or you're building equity, or your equity was eroding. And I think from starting from the recession period in 2008 up until the present, a lot of brands have seen significant erosion in brand equity because they have gone to efficiency-based media buying, and they've taken their eye off the important aspect of equity building creative.
Next question. How does this fit in with marketing mix models, MMM?
So short-term effects are what mix measures short-term effects, and so does sales effect at NCS. So all the work that mostly is done is on the short term. Mix is a short-term measure. We're a short-term measure. A sales effect in NCS is a short-term measure. The long-term mix does have some models that they can apply for long-term. But if you really want to understand long-term, I think the consensus has been that single sources is the ideal way to actually track somebody, how that advertising changed somebody's behavior across the long term.
Is LTE a prediction of buyer behavior?
No, nothing's predicted. We look back and actually track the actual behavior. There's nothing modeled. It's actually tracking how many times you bought the brand, how much money did you spend in the year following your behavior change due to advertising, and then did you buy the brand more often? We have prior behavior so we can see, was there an uptick in the purchasing of the brand? So there's really no modeling or prediction involved.
Yeah, I think what it does is it illustrates the importance of the first purchase. That the game is to get someone to try the brand, to get your brand in the consideration set. So every time the person goes to this store, this is one of the brands they're going to consider. And that's what advertising does. And once the brand goes from an unknown to a known and gets into the consideration set of the consumer is more likely to respond to subsequent advertising, to respond to promotional activity around that brand. So it is predictive of future purchase behavior because we tend towards the familiar.
I think long-term effects is a way of measuring the health of the brand. So if we're seeing a high long-term effect measure, we're seeing advertising creating this long-term halo. The brand is healthy. There's a lot of repeat. Consumers have been moved up the scale, and they're actually the value. The brand has value. So while it's built on past behavior, I suppose it could be considered a prediction of what's going to happen in the future because it is a measure of equity.
And our last question, how does LTE account for external factors?
External factors.
Well, I think it is essentially, I mean, that's why effective modeling of all of this is a dynamic day-to-day exercise. So an external factor, for example, might be that one of the major brands in the category closes shop, or a big new brand comes into the category. Those are things that have to be added into the equation. Whenever you do this kind of analysis, you get two benefits from it. First, you get the analytical benefit of actually being able to measure the effect. The other thing is you get the discipline of going through and monitoring all of the variables in a way that just makes you a smarter marketer because you're aware of these external factors, and because your awareness of those factors leads you to effectively counter them and address them.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you, David and Leslie, for taking the time to present the paper to our webcast crowd today. And have a great day. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're open for other questions if they occur.
Okay, if anybody has any questions after the closing of today's webcast, you can email me, and I'm happy to direct the questions to both David and Leslie. My email address is Zena, ZENA, @thearf.org. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.